A woman stood in the doorway of the bakery, her eyes dark and filled with an intensity that made Bayo's blood run cold. She was tall, her face angular and sharp, and her eyes were fixed on him with an unwavering gaze. There was something otherworldly about her, something that sent a chill down his spine. "You," she said, her voice like ice. "You dare call this perfection? You who hide behind your cakes and your false image of greatness? You have ignored the simple beauty of what you do, and for that, you shall be cursed." Bayo took a step back, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" The woman stepped forward, her presence suffocating. "I am the one who has witnessed your arrogance, your obsession with perfection. And now, you will learn what it means to bake without pride." Before Bayo could speak, the woman raised her hands, and a cold gust of wind swept through the bakery, snuffing out the candles on the shelves and swirling the flour in the air. The woman's eyes flashed, and with a final, chilling word, she cursed him. "From this day forth, every cake you bake will come alive. You will bake for the world, but they will be your torment. Your creations will haunt you, mocking your every move until you understand the true meaning of humility." With that, the woman vanished, leaving Bayo alone in the bakery, his breath shallow and his mind reeling. He looked down at the shattered cake, and in that moment, he knew his life had changed forever. The curse had been cast, and there would be no escaping it. The morning after the curse was cast, Bayo woke up in a cold sweat. His mind was reeling from the nightmare that had come to life in his bakery. The grotesque cake creature had been terrifying, and the memory of it clawed at him. He had tried to rationalize it, to convince himself it was a fluke. But deep down, he knew the truth. The curse was real. Despite the horror, he had a job to do. The bakery needed to function, orders needed to be fulfilled. He had a cake to deliver today, a large one for a birthday celebration at a high-end restaurant. But he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he touched was going to spiral out of control. As he prepared the dough for the next cake, he tried to focus. Today, he was supposed to bake a lion-shaped cake for a child's birthday. Simple enough, right? But even as he shaped the cake, the pressure of perfection weighed on him. He couldn't just bake any lion. It had to be the best lion anyone had ever seen. His reputation was on the line. Bayo shaped the lion carefully, creating its menere with perfect swirls of frosting, its eyes with sugar fondant, and its teeth with carefully sculpted icing. When the cake was finished, he stepped back, admiring his work. The lion was flawless, so lifelike it almost seemed as though it could roar. But the moment Bayo took his hands off it, the curse took hold. The lion's eyes flickered, and a low growl echoed through the bakery. Bayo gasped and stepped back, his heart racing. The lion's head tilted slightly, as if it were alive, as if it were watching him. Suddenly, the frosting on its menere began to shimmer, and with a terrifying roar, the lion leapt off the counter and onto the floor, knocking over everything in its path. Bayo stumbled backward in shock. The lion was no longer a cake. It was a wild, living beast, its body made of frosting and cake but moving like an animal made of flesh. Its teeth bared as it growled again, and Bayo had no idea what to do. "Get away!" he shouted, but the lion only advanced toward him, its massive paws pounding the ground. Bayo scrambled for the door, but the lion was fast, its body twisting and moving with an unnatural grace. Panicking, Bayo grabbed a broom and swung it at the creature. The broom shattered upon contact, and the lion pounced, knocking him to the ground. Frosting and cake splattered everywhere as Bayo struggled to free himself. In a desperate move, Bayo reached for the nearest knife and plunged it into the lion's body, hoping to stop it. The knife sank into the cake, but the creature didn't stop. Instead, it let out a deafening roar, and Bayo felt the terrifying power of the curse take hold of him. The cake creature was alive, and it wanted to destroy him. Suddenly, the door to the bakery flew open, and a neighbor ran in, startled by the noise. "What in the world?" The lion, distracted for a moment, turned its attention toward the new person, growling menacingly. Before Bayo could react, the neighbor bolted out of the door, terrified by the scene. In a burst of adrenaline, Bayo grabbed the lion's mane and yanked it toward the door. With a final push, he shoved the beast out into the street, and it stumbled away, leaving a trail of frosting and cake behind. Breathing heavily, Bayo collapsed to the ground, his hands shaking. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The curse, this was no longer just a strange occurrence. His cakes were coming to life. But the terror didn't end there. In his panic, Bayo still had an order to fulfill. He had to finish a cake for a baby shower, a delicate, pastel-colored cake shaped like a crib. He hoped the next creation would be easier to manage. Bayo quickly set to work, focusing all his attention on shaping the crib. He decorated it with soft, creamy frosting, adding little sugar flowers and even a tiny fondant baby inside. When he finished, the cake looked like a peaceful, loving creation. It seemed harmless enough, just a cake, he reassured himself. But as he finished adding the final touches, something strange happened again. The baby inside the crib, which had been perfectly still, suddenly twitched. Then it started to move. At first, Bayo thought it was a trick of his tired mind, but no, it was real. The tiny baby in the cake began to cry. The sound was hollow and eerie, echoing in the quiet bakery. Bayo gasped in horror as the baby began to grow, expanding from its fondant form into something much larger, something more alive. Before his eyes, the baby cake transformed into a fully formed baby, still made of cake and frosting, but somehow terrifyingly lifelike. The baby wailed as it stretched its arms out, its body made entirely of cake and frosting yet somehow fluid, like it had a mind of its own. No, no, no. Bayo shouted, backing away. He tried to push the cake back onto the counter, but the baby climbed out of its crib, reaching toward him. The lifelike eyes stared up at him with an unsettling intelligence, and the baby's hands moved with an eerie precision. It was as if the curse had taken the simple act of baking and twisted it into a nightmare. The baby cake moved, its limbs contorting in ways no cake should. The baby's mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that snapped at Bayo. With a quick, frantic motion, he shoved the cake away from him, sending it crashing to the ground. In a panic, he turned to look for something, anything, to stop this madness. His heart pounded in his chest. His mind was a blur of terror and confusion. What was happening to him? Why were his cakes coming to life? As he struggled to contain the horror that had overtaken his bakery, his eyes landed on the next cake, the car cake for a wedding anniversary celebration. It was supposed to be a simple, elegant cake shaped like a vintage car, with pastel icing and delicate sugar flowers as decoration. It was meant to be a symbol of the couple's love for each other. But to Bayo, it seemed like another trap, a mistake waiting to happen. Nevertheless, he had no choice but to continue. He finished the car cake and carefully set it on the counter. It was perfect, a work of art, and yet, he felt a deep sense of dread wash over him as he gazed at it. Something wasn't right. Just as Bayo turned away to grab a box for the baby shower cake, the car cake began to shake. It rumbled like an engine starting, and before Bayo could move, it exploded from its cake form into something far more real. A full-size car, still made of cake and frosting, yet somehow solid, shot off the counter and onto the floor with a deafening crash. The car, still in the shape of an antique, revved its engine with terrifying force, and the bakery shook as if the walls themselves were going to crumble. The wheels, made from fondant, spun rapidly, and Bayo had to dive out of the way as the cake car tore through the bakery, smashing shelves and sending flour and sugar flying. It was all too much. His cakes, his creations, had come alive and were now wreaking havoc in his shop. With every new cake, the curse grew stronger, and Bayo was unable to stop it. The lion, the baby, and now the car, they were just the beginning. He had to figure out how to stop it before his entire life was destroyed by his own baked goods. Bayo woke up the next morning to an uneasy silence. The usual morning bustle of the bakery, which once brought him comfort, felt strange now. The air was thick with an unspoken dread. He could still feel the presence of the cakes that had come to life, each one haunting him with its twisted, unrelenting force. He had spent most of the night pacing, trying to figure out what to do, but no solution had come to mind. The curse was too strong, too unpredictable. His body felt worn down from the chaos of yesterday. He had to face the truth. He couldn't stop the curse. It was far beyond his control. And what's worse, the longer he stayed in the bakery, the more he felt like he was being consumed by it. The bakery, which was once a place of comfort and creativity, now felt like a prison. The shelves were covered in remnants of ruined cakes, crumbs of frosting, broken fondant pieces, and scraps of cake. It was a graveyard of his failures, each piece serving as a reminder of the curse's grip on him. It was as though the very walls of the bakery were closing in on him, a suffocating, oppressive force. As Bayo prepared for another day, the reality of his situation hit him harder than ever. The lion cake was still out there, roaming the streets, tearing through anything in its path. The baby cake, he shuddered at the thought, had somehow escaped, its cries still echoing in his mind. And the car cake, he didn't even know where it had gone, but he knew it was out there, causing havoc somewhere. He could no longer hide from the truth. The bakery wasn't just a place of baking anymore. It had become a battleground, a site of his torment. Bayo's hands trembled as he mixed the ingredients for the next cake. It was another birthday cake, a simple one this time, shaped like a giant cupcake. He had to try to bake something normal, something that wouldn't come to life. But as he shaped the cake, he felt the familiar sense of dread creeping up on him. The moment he placed the final touches on the cupcake cake, a strange, unsettling feeling filled the air. He froze. His stomach twisted in fear. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't stop himself. Slowly, he turned to face the cake, and as he did, the cupcake's frosting began to swirl. At first, it was a slight movement, just a tiny twist. But then it grew more intense, the frosting on top of the cupcake rising up in twisting, spiraling formations. The cake was alive. He could see it now, there was no denying it. With a sickening lurch, the cupcake cake grew, expanding far beyond what was possible for something made of cake. It morphed into a towering structure, its frosting becoming a swirling vortex of color and movement. It began to take shape, the frosting creating arms, legs, and a grotesque, smiling face. The cupcake was no longer just a cake, it was a monstrous creature, an abomination that loomed over him like something from a nightmare. No, no! Bayo shouted, backing away, his mind racing. Not again! Not another one! But the creature only grinned wider, its frosting-covered face leering down at him. It stepped off the counter, its legs made of cake now moving as though it were a real person, though its steps left a trail of frosting and crumbs in its wake. Before Bayo could react, the cupcake monster lunged at him, its frosting-covered arms stretching toward him with unnatural speed. Bayo ducked just in time, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature had no sense of mercy. It was as if it existed only to torment him. His mind raced for a solution, but there was none. There was no stopping this thing, no way to reverse the curse. It was too powerful, too unpredictable. Bayo had created these horrors, and now, they were hunting him. As the cupcake creature advanced, Bayo reached for anything he could find. He grabbed a spatula and swung it wildly at the creature, but the spatula just splattered into the frosting without causing any damage. The creature grabbed hold of him, its frosting-covered hands digging into his skin. He screamed, struggling to free himself, but the cupcake's grip tightened. Just as he thought he couldn't escape, the door to the bakery suddenly burst open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Mr. Olyamide, the same neighbor who had witnessed the lion cake the day before. He looked just as bewildered as Bayo felt, staring in shock at the monstrous cupcake creature. "Bayo!" Mr. Olyamide shouted, his voice filled with panic. "What in the world is happening here?" I don't know." Bayo gasped, his voice trembling. "I can't stop them. The cakes, they're lies." Mr. Olyamide, who had seen the havoc caused by the lion cake, looked at Bayo with sympathy. "You have to get out of here," he urged. "You can't keep baking like this. You're destroying yourself and everything around you. But Bayo couldn't leave. The bakery was his life, his passion. Even though it had become a place of nightmares, he couldn't bring himself to abandon it. I can't leave, Bayo muttered, his eyes wide with fear. I have to stop this. I have to fix it. Mr. Olyumide's eyes softened. I know you want to fix it, but you can't do it alone. Whatever curse is on you, you have to face it head on. Running away won't solve anything. As the cupcake creature advanced toward Bayo again, he realized the truth in Mr. Olyumide's words. He couldn't outrun the curse. He couldn't keep baking like this, hoping for a miracle. He had to face it, confront the source of his torment, and find a way to break the curse. The cupcake monster reached out for him once more, but this time, Bayo didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the creature's arm and held on tightly, his eyes fierce with determination. I'm done being afraid, he whispered to himself. With one last, desperate effort, he shoved the creature back, sending it crashing into the wall with a loud, splintering sound. It collapsed in a heap of cake and frosting, twitching and convulsing before falling still. Bayo stood there, breathing heavily, covered in frosting and crumbs, his body trembling. The bakery was a mess. The lion cake was still out there, and the other creations, he couldn't even think about them. But at that moment, Bayo knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep running from the curse. He had to confront it, face the consequences of his actions, and find a way to stop the madness before everything he had worked for was destroyed. The nightmare had only just begun. Bayo couldn't remember the last time he had slept. The chaos in his bakery had consumed him, and each day had blurred into the next. The lion cake, the baby cake, the car cake, and now the cupcake monster, each one had come to life with terrifying force, each one leaving him with a mess to clean and a deeper sense of dread. But he knew he couldn't keep running from the truth. The curse, whatever it was, had to have a reason. And it was time to confront it. The bakery was silent now, eerily so. The cupcake monster, though terrifying, had been neutralized, but the remnants of the creatures he had brought to life remained. The broken pieces of cake and frosting lay scattered everywhere, a constant reminder of the horror that was now his reality. Bayo stood alone, staring at the wreckage. He could almost feel the weight of the curse in the air, a suffocating presence that seemed to hang over him, watching, waiting. He took a deep breath and sat on the counter, running his hands through his hair. He had been trying to make sense of everything. Why had it happened? What had he done wrong? Why had the cakes started coming to life? He had always prided himself on his baking skills, on the love and care he poured into each creation. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. There had to be a reason. Bayo's thoughts wandered back to the moment everything had changed, the moment the woman had walked into his bakery with an impossible request. She had asked for a cake for her daughter's birthday, and Bayo had created a beautiful, elaborate cake that he was proud of. But she hadn't been satisfied with it. She had demanded something more, something bigger, something grander. He remembered her face, her cold, calculating eyes, and the way she had scolded him for not living up to her expectations. And then, she had cursed him. "You will never bake again without suffering," she had said. Her words had been sharp, like a knife, and though he hadn't taken them seriously at the time, he now realized how deadly they had been. He had unknowingly crossed a line, and now he was paying the price. Bayo closed his eyes, trying to block out the memories of that fateful day. The woman had left the bakery in a huff, muttering curses under her breath, but Bayo had shrugged it off. Little did he know that her words would come to haunt him in ways he couldn't comprehend. He had to find her. The thought struck him suddenly, like a bolt of lightning. If she had cursed him, then she was the key to ending this madness. He had to find her and make things right. He had to apologize, ask for her forgiveness, and beg her to lift the curse before it consumed him completely. Bayo stood up, his resolve hardening. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help. Just then, the door to the bakery creaked open, and in walked Mr. Olyumide. He had become a familiar face in Bayo's life over the past few days, offering advice, checking on him, and, most importantly, trying to help him make sense of the madness that had taken over his life. "Bayo," Mr. Olumide said, his voice soft but filled with concern. "I see the bakery's still in a state of chaos. You've been at this for days now. You can't keep doing this to yourself." "I know," Bayo muttered, his voice hollow. "But I don't know what else to do. I've tried everything. The cakes, they just keep coming to life, and I can't stop it." Mr. Olumide stepped closer, his eyes searching Bayo's face for answers. "You're not going to solve this by baking more cakes, Bayo. You're going to have to face the source of the curse." "I know," Bayo said, his voice shaking. "That's why I need your help. There's a woman. She cursed me. I need to find her, apologize, and beg her to lift it." Mr. Olumide raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Do you know where she is?" Bayo nodded. "I remember her. I remember everything she said. She was angry at me because I didn't make the cake to her standards. She cursed me before she left. I need to find her. I need to make things right." The older man sighed, his expression a mixture of concern and understanding. "I understand, but you're going to have to be careful. People like her, people who can curse others, they don't always have the best of intentions. She might not even want to lift the curse." Bayo's eyes burned with determination. "I have to try. I have to stop this." Mr. Olumide hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll help you. But we have to go together. This is no simple task, Bayo. You're dealing with something far more powerful than you realize." Bayo nodded, grateful for the support. He wasn't alone in this after all. The thought gave him a bit of relief. For the first time in days, he felt a small spark of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. As the two of them left the bakery and stepped into the street, Bayo couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. He had no idea where the woman was, but he had a feeling she wasn't going to be easy to find. He couldn't shake the sense that she had already anticipated this moment, that she had been waiting for him to come looking for her. But he had no choice. He couldn't keep running from the curse. He had to face it head-on. The journey to find the woman would not be easy. It would be fraught with dangers, twists, and turns. But Bayo was ready. He had to do whatever it took to stop the horror that had taken over his life and return to the life he had once known. The sun had set by the time Bayo and Mr. Olumide reached the edge of the town. The quiet streets that were once familiar now felt foreign, as if the town had changed in the days since Bayo had first begun his journey. His bakery, now abandoned, loomed in the distance, but he couldn't afford to look back. There was no turning back. Not now. Not with the curse still breathing down his neck.